the first rays of sunlight spilled across Maple Grove Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its perfectly trimmed lawns, flower-lined sidewalks, and families who believed they had found the safest place to call home. Every driveway looked polished, every mailbox stood freshly painted, and every front porch displayed colorful seasonal decorations that gave visitors the impression of a peaceful, close-knit community. To outsiders, Maple Grove looked like the American dream. Inside the neighborhood, however, another story was quietly unfolding. Hidden behind freshly painted fences and smiling neighborhood newsletters was an atmosphere built on fear rather than friendship. At the center of it all stood one man, Gregory Stanton. As president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association for nearly 8 years, Gregory had become the most powerful person in the neighborhood. Every landscaping contract, maintenance project, neighborhood improvement, and HOA fine eventually passed through his office. Residents described him as organized, experienced, and deeply committed to protecting property values. But those descriptions only reflected what Gregory wanted people to see. Behind closed doors, he controlled the community through intimidation. Letters demanding hundreds of dollars in fines appeared without warning. Homeowners received violation notices for flower pots placed inches outside approved guidelines. Elderly residents were threatened with legal action over fading fence paint. Young families were ordered to remove children's basketball hoops after receiving anonymous complaints. Nobody dared challenge him openly, because anyone who questioned Gregory somehow became his next target. Over the years, people learned that remaining silent was easier than fighting. Some paid unfair fines simply to avoid conflict. Others quietly sold their homes and moved away. Every departure only strengthened Gregory's control. Among the newest residents of Maple Grove lived Daniel Foster. Unlike many homeowners, Daniel had not purchased the house as a luxury investment. He had bought it with nearly every dollar he had saved during 20 years as a firefighter. The modest 2-story home represented something far more important than real estate. It represented security. After losing his wife to illness 3 years earlier, Daniel wanted a peaceful place where he could raise his 12-year-old daughter, Lily. For Lily, Maple Grove promised stability after years of hospital visits, uncertainty, and grief. Daniel believed the neighborhood would give her the fresh start she desperately deserved. During their first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Neighbors welcomed them politely. Children waved while riding bicycles through quiet streets. Lily slowly began smiling again. For the first time since losing her mother, their house finally felt like a home. Then the first HOA letter arrived. The envelope looked ordinary enough. Inside sat an official notice demanding a $350 fine because Daniel's American flag allegedly violated community display regulations. Confused, Daniel reread the letter several times. The flag had been mounted respectfully beside the front porch, exactly as countless other homes displayed theirs. Nothing seemed unusual. Assuming it was simply a misunderstanding, Daniel contacted the HOA office requesting clarification. Instead of receiving an explanation, another notice arrived days later. This time, the violation involved the height of shrubs planted beside his driveway. The required fine totaled $275. Within 2 weeks, additional notices appeared. Improper trash can placement, unauthorized garden decorations, mailbox paint color. Each carried another financial penalty. Daniel carefully reviewed the neighborhood guidelines repeatedly. Most accusations made little sense. Several cited rules that other homes openly ignored. Yet only his property continued receiving violations. At first, Daniel believed unfortunate coincidence explained everything. But coincidence eventually becomes impossible to believe, especially when it keeps happening. Across the neighborhood, older residents quietly watched. Many recognized the pattern immediately. Gregory had chosen another target. One afternoon, while mowing his lawn, Daniel noticed an elderly woman watching him sympathetically from across the street. Her name was Margaret Wilson. She had lived in Maple Grove for nearly 25 years. Margaret understood the neighborhood better than almost anyone. She also understood Gregory. Years earlier, after questioning unexplained increases in HOA fees, Margaret suddenly began receiving violation notices almost weekly. Eventually, she stopped asking questions. Like many others, she simply paid the fines. Fear became cheaper than resistance. As Daniel continued working outside, Margaret quietly observed another strange detail. A luxury black SUV pulled slowly into Gregory Stanton's driveway. Moments later, a landscaping contractor stepped out carrying a thick envelope. Instead of discussing neighborhood maintenance, the two men disappeared inside Gregory's garage. The contractor left less than 15 minutes later. Margaret had witnessed similar visits many times before. Different contractors, different envelopes, always the same pattern. She never understood why. She simply knew something about it felt wrong. Later that evening, Daniel organized every HOA notice across his dining room table. The total amount demanded already exceeded $1,000. As he studied each letter carefully, Lily noticed something unusual. The photographs attached as evidence looked strangely familiar. Not because of the violations, because the dates printed beneath them seemed inconsistent. Several pictures appeared to have been taken weeks before Daniel had even purchased the house. Another photograph clearly showed holiday decorations belonging to the previous homeowner. Someone had reused old images. Daniel frowned thoughtfully. That wasn't merely unfair. It suggested carelessness. Or something much worse. The following weekend, Maple Grove hosted its monthly HOA community meeting inside the neighborhood clubhouse. Residents filled folding chairs while Gregory Stanton confidently stood at the front reviewing budgets, maintenance updates, and new community policies. Everything appeared perfectly professional. Charts displayed responsible spending. Financial summaries looked organized. Improvement projects sounded impressive. Most homeowners listened quietly. Few asked questions. Daniel attended hopping to understand why his property kept receiving violations. As financial reports appeared on the projector screen, something unexpected caught his attention. One landscaping company had received nearly every major neighborhood contract during Gregory's presidency. Green Horizon Property Services. Millions of dollars had flowed through that single contractor over several years. Oddly, the company repeatedly charged significantly higher prices than similar businesses in neighboring communities. Nobody seemed concerned. Everyone simply accepted the reports. But Daniel's instincts, sharpened through years of emergency service, told him something wasn't right. Patterns mattered. Small inconsistencies often pointed toward larger truths. As the meeting ended, residents quietly filed toward the exit. Daniel remained seated for several moments, studying printed financial summaries left behind on nearby tables. Numbers rarely lied. People often did. That was when another homeowner quietly approached him. It was Margaret. Without saying much, she slipped a folded envelope into Daniel's hand before leaving the clubhouse. Only after returning home did Daniel open it. Inside were copies of HOA financial statements dating back nearly 6 years. Several pages contained handwritten notes. Amounts circled in red ink. Question marks beside contractor payments. And one sentence written carefully across the final page. Follow the landscaping contracts. That's where everything began. Daniel looked back toward the neighborhood through his living room window. Children laughed outside. Families walked dogs beneath quiet evening skis. Everything still looked peaceful. But beneath Maple Grove's beautiful appearance, Someone had spent years hiding secrets behind carefully maintained lawns and polished community newsletters. Daniel had no idea how deep those secrets reached. He only knew one thing. The unfair fines were never really about bushes, flags, or mailboxes. They were distractions. And somewhere inside Gregory Stanton's carefully controlled HOA empire, a much larger scam waited to be uncovered. What Daniel discovered next would not only change his own life, it would shake the entire neighborhood and expose a secret that had remained hidden for years. Daniel Foster barely slept that night. The envelope Margaret Wilson had slipped into his hand remained open on the dining room table long after Lily had gone to bed. The financial statements were old, but the handwritten notes told a story that couldn't be ignored. Certain payments had been circled repeatedly. Landscaping contracts increased every year, even though the neighborhood looked exactly the same. The numbers simply didn't make sense. As a firefighter, Daniel had spent 2 decades investigating emergencies after the danger had passed. He had learned one lesson that never failed. Small details often revealed the biggest truths. If something appeared ordinary on the surface, that was exactly where people stopped looking. The next morning, Daniel began researching Green Horizon Property Services. At first, everything seemed legitimate. The company had a professional website, business registration records, and a long list of completed projects. But the deeper he searched through public records, the stranger things became. The company's business address wasn't a commercial office. It was a small mailbox rental store, nearly 40 miles away. Its listed phone number changed twice over the previous 3 years. Several online reviews looked suspiciously identical, posted within days of each other from newly created accounts. None of those facts proved fraud. But together, they raised uncomfortable questions. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove through neighboring communities governed by different homeowners associations. He spoke politely with maintenance workers trimming hedges and replacing irrigation systems. He compared landscaping schedules, tree removal costs, and lawn maintenance contracts. The differences shocked him. Communities larger than Maple Grove were paying nearly half as much for the same services. Some paid even less. When Daniel returned home, he organized everything into a notebook. Contract values, maintenance schedules, public records, photographs. Every new piece of information strengthened one conclusion. Someone was dramatically overcharging Maple Grove. The only question was who benefited. Across the neighborhood, Gregory Stanton remained completely unaware that anyone had started connecting the dots. He continued issuing violation notices almost daily. A family received a fine because a holiday wreath remained on their front door one day beyond the approved schedule. A retired veteran was warned about fatting paint on his backyard fence, even though it wasn't visible from the street. A single mother was threatened with penalties because her son's bicycle remained on the driveway after sunset. Each fine brought more money into HOA accounts. Most residents paid quietly. Very few appealed. Fear had become routine. Margaret watched it happen from her front porch with growing frustration. For years, she had blamed herself for staying silent. Every unfair fine she paid. Every neighbor who quietly moved away. Every meeting where nobody challenged Gregory. She wondered how different Maple Grove might have become if residents had spoken together instead of suffering alone. Perhaps Daniel represented the opportunity they had all been waiting for. Meanwhile, Lily noticed changes in her father. Instead of relaxing after work, he spent evenings studying financial records. His notebook grew thicker every day. Although he tried hiding his concern, she recognized the same determined expression he carried before responding to difficult emergencies during his firefighting career. She understood something important without needing an explanation. Her father believed someone innocent was being hurt. And whenever that happened, he never walked away. A few days later, Daniel attended another HOA committee meeting. This time, he paid less attention to Gregory's presentation and more attention to everyone else in the room. One board member avoided discussing financial reports entirely. Another seemed uncomfortable whenever landscaping expenses appeared on screen. The neighborhood treasurer, however, looked genuinely confused while reviewing several payment summaries. That reaction caught Daniel's attention. After the meeting ended, the treasurer quietly remained behind organizing paperwork. Daniel introduced himself politely. The conversation remained casual at first. Nothing about accusations. Nothing about fraud. Simply questions about budgeting procedures and contractor selection. The treasurer admitted something surprising. She had repeatedly requested detailed invoices for Green Horizon Property Services, but never received complete documentation. Gregory always explained that the accounting department handled those records separately. As HOA president, he approved emergency expenditures personally. The board trusted him. After all, he had led the community for nearly 8 years. Nobody imagined their own president would misuse that trust. The treasurer lowered her voice before adding one final observation. Several board members had privately questioned the landscaping costs over the years. But every concern somehow disappeared before reaching official meeting agendas. Daniel thanked her respectfully. He left with another important piece of the puzzle. Gregory controlled not only the money, he controlled the information. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued gathering evidence carefully. He photographed areas supposedly receiving expensive maintenance. Many looked untouched. Invoices claimed hundreds of newly planted flowers in locations where no flowers existed. Tree removal charges appeared for trees still standing. Lawn restoration projects had been billed for common areas that hadn't changed in years. Every discovery revealed another inconsistency. Still, Daniel remained cautious. Evidence required patience. Assumptions solved nothing. One Saturday morning, while walking through the neighborhood park with Lily, Daniel noticed several landscaping employees loading equipment into company trucks. One worker accidentally dropped a folder while closing the truck door. Papers scattered across the pavement. Daniel instinctively helped gather them. Most contained ordinary work schedules. But one document immediately caught his eye. It listed multiple addresses scheduled for maintenance completion. Several homes belonged to residents who later received HOA violation notices claiming their landscaping failed inspection. According to Green Horizon's own paperwork, the work had already been completed successfully. The contradiction lasted only seconds before the worker quickly collected every page. Still, Daniel had seen enough. The company's records directly conflicted with Gregory's violation letters. That couldn't be coincidence. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Gregory began sensing subtle changes throughout Maple Grove. Residents who once lowered their eyes now spoke quietly in small groups after HOA meetings. More homeowners requested copies of financial reports. Several asked detailed questions about contractor bidding. For the first time in years, people seemed curious. Gregory didn't like curiosity. Within days, Daniel received 3 additional violation notices. One cited the position of his trash bins. Another claimed unauthorized driveway stains. The third accused him of failing to maintain landscaping that had been professionally serviced only the week before. The timing wasn't accidental. Gregory had realized Daniel was asking questions. The pressure increased deliberately. But instead of intimidating Daniel, the unfair notices strengthened his resolve. Every false accusation became additional evidence of selective enforcement. Margaret noticed the pattern immediately. So did several longtime residents. Something was changing inside Maple Grove. Fear was slowly giving way to determination. One evening, Margaret invited Daniel to her home. Inside her neatly organized living room sat four other longtime residents: retired teachers, military veterans, a former accountant, people who had quietly endured years of unexplained fines and intimidation. Each brought folders filled with old HOA letters, payment receipts, photographs, and correspondence dating back nearly a decade. Separately, their stories seemed unfortunate. Together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Nearly every resident who questioned HOA spending had eventually become the target of repeated violations. Some paid thousands of dollars. Others sold their homes simply to escape the pressure. The room fell silent as everyone realized they weren't isolated victims. They had all experienced the same treatment. Daniel carefully organized every document into chronological order. What emerged looked far larger than personal harassment. It resembled a carefully managed system. A system designed to silence anyone who threatened Gregory Stanton's control. As the meeting ended, Daniel carried home several boxes of records. He finally possessed enough information to suspect serious financial misconduct. But suspicion wasn't enough. To expose someone who had manipulated an entire neighborhood for years, he needed undeniable proof. And somewhere inside Gregory Stanton's locked office at the Maple Grove clubhouse, one missing document had the potential to expose the entire scam. The challenge was no longer discovering whether corruption existed. The challenge was proving it before Gregory realized how close the truth had come. The following Monday morning, Maple Grove Estates looked as peaceful as ever. Children waited for school buses beneath tall maple trees. Neighbors watered flower beds while exchanging friendly waves. Lawn sprinklers quietly covered freshly cut grass with tiny drops of sunlight. To anyone passing through, it remained the picture of a perfect suburban community. Only a handful of residents knew that, beneath its calm appearance, years of hidden corruption were beginning to unravel. Daniel Foster understood that gathering evidence was no longer enough. The truth had to be presented carefully, legally, and beyond question. One mistake could allow Gregory Stanton to dismiss every accusation as nothing more than personal revenge. So instead of confronting the HOA president directly, Daniel focused on building an undeniable timeline. Every evening after work, his dining room transformed into a temporary investigation center. Financial statements covered the table. Photographs filled large folders. HOA violation notices were organized by date. Landscaping invoices were compared against neighborhood maintenance records. Margaret Wilson joined him several nights each week, bringing even more documents she had collected over the years. The more they organized everything, the more obvious the pattern became. The same contractor, Green Horizon Property Services, had received nearly every landscaping contract for 8 consecutive years. Contract prices increased almost every season. Yet neighborhood improvements barely changed. Even stranger, invoices repeatedly charged for projects that residents insisted had never happened. One invoice claimed the installation of 50 new ornamental shrubs near the community entrance. Current photographs clearly showed mature bushes that had existed long before Gregory became HOA president. Another bill listed emergency irrigation, repairs after a major storm. Weather reports confirmed no damaging storm had occurred that month. Piece by piece, reality separated itself from paperwork. The scam was becoming impossible to hide. Then Daniel made another discovery. While reviewing public business records, he noticed that Green Horizon Property Services had recently changed ownership. Curious, he searched deeper. The new owner's mailing address immediately caught his attention. It matched the address of Gregory Stanton's brother-in-law. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. The connection wasn't illegal by itself. But Gregory had never disclosed that relationship during HOA meetings. Residents believed contracts were awarded through competitive bidding. Instead, it appeared millions of dollars had quietly flowed toward a company connected to Gregory's own extended family. Conflict of interest suddenly became a very real possibility. Margaret covered her mouth as the realization settled over her. Everything finally made sense. The repeated landscaping contracts, the inflated invoices, the aggressive fines, the intimidation. It had never been about protecting neighborhood standards. It had been about protecting a business arrangement. Daniel immediately contacted the former accountant who had attended their neighborhood meeting. Together, they carefully reviewed years of financial reports. Within hours, the retired accountant identified another disturbing pattern. Every time HOA reserves increased, new landscaping projects mysteriously appeared. The projects drained community funds almost immediately. Then, to replace the money, homeowners received another wave of violation notices. The system repeated itself year after year. The HOA wasn't simply collecting fines. It was creating reasons to collect them. The realization spread quietly among the small group of residents helping Daniel. Shock slowly turned into determination. For years, they had blamed themselves for receiving repeated violations. Now they understood. They had been funding someone else's scheme. Still, Daniel remained careful. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary proof. He wanted evidence that no lawyer, accountant, or HOA board member could deny. That opportunity arrived unexpectedly. The neighborhood treasurer called Daniel one afternoon. Her voice sounded unusually anxious. Gregory had announced an emergency board meeting to approve another large landscaping contract worth nearly $400,000. The proposal included extensive tree replacement, irrigation upgrades, and sidewalk restoration. There was just one problem. None of those projects appeared necessary. Most sidewalks had been replaced less than 2 years earlier. The irrigation system functioned perfectly. The trees remained healthy. Daniel immediately requested a copy of the proposed contract. At first, the board refused. But HOA bylaws guaranteed homeowners the right to inspect financial documents before major expenditures. Reluctantly, they complied. The contract revealed exactly what Daniel hoped to find. Large sections had been copied almost word for word from previous landscaping agreements. Even the project descriptions remained identical. Only the dates and dollar amounts had changed. The proposed costs had increased dramatically despite describing the same work completed years earlier. This wasn't ordinary bookkeeping. It looked like systematic overbilling. Daniel quietly made certified copies of every page. Then he contacted an independent construction estimator recommended by another resident. Without mentioning the HOA, Daniel asked for an objective estimate. The expert reviewed the contract carefully. His conclusion stunned everyone. The listed projects should cost approximately $90,000. The HOA contract requested nearly 4 times that amount. No reasonable explanation justified such a difference. That report became the strongest evidence yet. Meanwhile, Gregory Stanton sensed control slipping away. Attendance at HOA meetings suddenly doubled. Residents who once remained silent now requested financial documents. Questions became increasingly detailed. Several homeowners openly asked why Green Horizon continued receiving contracts without competitive bids. Gregory dismissed every concern as misinformation spread by disgruntled individuals. But the confidence behind his speeches had begun fading. For the first time in years, he realized people were no longer afraid. Fear had protected him. Curiosity threatened him. One evening, as Daniel returned home, he found another violation notice taped to his front door. This one demanded nearly $2,000 for unauthorized structural modifications. The accusation made no sense. Nothing on his property had changed. The notice appeared desperate. Instead of intimidating Daniel, it convinced neighboring homeowners that Gregory had truly lost control. Residents who previously avoided involvement now approached Daniel voluntarily. More evidence appeared. Former contractors admitted they had repeatedly lost bids despite offering lower prices. Past board members described meetings where financial discussions mysteriously disappeared from official minutes. One retired maintenance supervisor even produced old work schedules, proving that certain landscaping projects had never taken place despite being fully paid. The mountain of evidence became overwhelming. Daniel organized everything into professionally labeled binders. Financial records, photographs, public business documents, conflict of interest reports, contract comparisons, independent cost estimates, resident statements, board meeting minutes. Every document reinforced the same conclusion. This was no longer suspicion. It was a pattern. The only remaining step involved presenting everything to the proper authorities. Late Friday afternoon, Daniel, Margaret, the former accountant, and several longtime residents walked together into the county office responsible for overseeing homeowner association complaints. They carried 3 heavy storage boxes filled with carefully organized evidence. Investigators accepted every document. Auditors immediately recognized the seriousness of the allegations. An official review began that very day. Daniel returned home exhausted, but strangely peaceful. For the first time since moving into Maple Grove, he believed the neighborhood might finally become the community everyone deserved. Across town, Gregory Stanton remained completely unaware that county investigators had already begun reviewing years of financial records. He still believed another wave of fines would silence residents. He had no idea that the documents sitting inside those 3 storage boxes were about to expose the secret scam he had spent nearly a decade hiding. And within days, the man who once controlled an entire neighborhood through fear would discover that no amount of power could protect someone when the truth finally caught up. The following Tuesday began like every other morning in Maple Grove Estates. Birds chirped from neatly trimmed oak trees. Parents walked children to the neighborhood bus stop. Lawn sprinklers watered perfectly maintained grass while neighbors waved politely across quiet streets. Everything appeared normal. But beneath that peaceful routine, a storm had already arrived. Shortly after 9 o'clock, several county vehicles slowly entered the Maple Grove Clubhouse parking lot. They weren't police cars with flashing lights. They were vehicles belonging to county investigators, financial auditors, and legal compliance officers assigned to review homeowner association operations. Residents noticed immediately. Curtains moved. Garage doors opened. People stepped onto porches, quietly watching unfamiliar officials carry boxes of documents into the clubhouse. Word spread through the neighborhood within minutes. The investigation had officially begun. Inside the clubhouse, Gregory Stanton attempted to maintain his usual confidence. He welcomed investigators with the same polished smile he had used for years during HOA meetings. At first, he appeared calm. After all, he believed every document had been carefully prepared. Every financial report looked professional. Every landscaping contract carried official signatures. He expected another routine review. Then investigators requested records Gregory never imagined anyone would compare. Original contractor bids, vendor payment histories, bank transfer authorizations, board meeting drafts, email correspondence, competitive bidding documentation, conflict of interest disclosures. Gregory's confidence slowly disappeared. Some documents could not be produced. Others contradicted official reports. Several signatures appeared on approvals for meetings that certain board members later confirmed they had never attended. By the second day, auditors uncovered something even more disturbing. Large payments approved for Green Horizon Property Services had been divided into smaller amounts just below the spending threshold that required full board approval. The pattern repeated dozens of times over several years. It wasn't random. It appeared intentional. Meanwhile, independent inspectors visited every major landscaping project listed in HOA financial records. They photographed sidewalks supposedly replaced, trees allegedly removed, flower beds reportedly redesigned, irrigation systems claimed to have been upgraded. Many projects showed little or no evidence of the expensive work residents had paid for. The difference between invoices and reality became impossible to ignore. Maple Grove residents watched everything unfold with mixed emotions. Some felt relieved. Others felt angry. Many elderly homeowners quietly cried after realizing they had spent years paying unfair fines while believing the money improved their community. Instead, much of it had disappeared into inflated contracts. Margaret Wilson stood outside her home watching investigators move between properties. She thought about neighbors who had moved away after constant harassment. Families forced to choose between paying HOA fines or covering household expenses. Retirees who quietly accepted intimidation because they feared losing everything they had worked for. The truth had arrived too late for some, but not for everyone. Daniel Foster continued cooperating fully with investigators. He answered questions carefully, provided additional records whenever requested, never exaggerated, never celebrated. He understood something important. Justice worked best when facts spoke louder than emotions. Several weeks later, the county completed its investigation. The findings shocked even longtime residents. For nearly 8 years, Gregory Stanton had approved millions of dollars in HOA contracts connected to businesses owned or controlled by close relatives. Competitive bidding procedures had been ignored repeatedly. Community funds had been spent on inflated invoices. Numerous maintenance projects had been partially completed or never completed at all. Residents had unknowingly financed unnecessary contracts through steadily increasing HOA fees and aggressive violation fines. The investigation also concluded that HOA enforcement had not been applied fairly. Homeowners who questioned spending patterns received significantly more violations than residents who remained silent. Selective enforcement had become a tool for discouraging criticism. The evidence was overwhelming. Gregory Stanton resigned before the HOA board could remove him. County authorities referred the financial findings for further legal review, while the Homeowners Association immediately suspended every contract connected to Green Horizon Property Services. The company quietly closed its operations only weeks later. For the first time in nearly a decade, Maple Grove Estates elected a completely new HOA board. Unlike previous elections, attendance overflowed the community clubhouse. Residents who had spent years avoiding meetings now filled every chair. Some even stood along the walls. The neighborhood had finally found its voice. Margaret Wilson received the longest standing ovation of the evening. Many homeowners thanked her for preserving old financial records when others had lost hope. Daniel was also recognized, not because he sought attention, but because he had refused to ignore what others considered impossible to challenge. The newly elected board announced immediate reforms. Every future contract would require multiple competitive bids. Monthly financial statements would become publicly available online. Independent audits would occur every year. Violation notices would require photographic evidence reviewed by more than one board member. Community meetings would be live-streamed for every homeowner. Transparency replaced secrecy. Trust slowly replaced fear. One by one, Unnecessary fines issued during Gregory's final years were reviewed. Many homeowners received refunds. Others had penalties permanently removed from their records. Although money could never erase years of stress, it represented something more important: accountability. As spring arrived, Maple Grove began changing in ways residents hadn't imagined possible. Neighbors, who once avoided each other, now gathered for weekend cookouts. Children played basketball without parents worrying about receiving another violation letter. Gardens flourished. Holiday decorations returned. People smiled more often. The neighborhood finally felt like a community instead of a collection of frightened homeowners. Daniel and Lily noticed the biggest difference during evening walks. Instead of hearing whispered complaints behind closed doors, they heard laughter. Families sat together on front porches. Retirees shared gardening tips. New friendships formed naturally. The atmosphere Gregory had controlled through fear disappeared almost overnight. One afternoon, Lily asked her father why he had refused to give up when everyone else seemed too afraid to speak. Daniel looked around the neighborhood before answering quietly. He believed silence protects problems. Courage protects people. Sometimes one person asking honest questions gives everyone else permission to do the same. Months later, Maple Grove received recognition from the county for implementing one of the most transparent homeowner association governance programs in the region. Other communities requested copies of its new policies. Board members from neighboring HOAs visited to learn how public accountability restored resident confidence. Ironically, the neighborhood Gregory claimed to protect became stronger only after his leadership ended. On a warm summer evening, Daniel stood on his front porch watching Lily ride her bicycle safely through streets filled with smiling neighbors. The same neighborhood that once overwhelmed them with unfair fines had become the peaceful home they originally believed they were buying. Margaret walked across the street carrying homemade cookies, joining several neighbors gathering for an outdoor community dinner. No one discussed old violations anymore. No one feared opening their mailbox. The clubhouse that once represented intimidation now hosted family movie nights, charity events, and neighborhood celebrations. Daniel smiled quietly. Not because someone had fallen, but because an entire community had finally stood back up. The greatest victory had never been exposing Gregory Stanton. The greatest victory was proving that ordinary people, working together with honesty and courage, could reclaim the place they called home. Because corruption may hide behind polished reports, expensive contracts, and confident leaders. But the truth has one remarkable habit. It always grows stronger when good people refuse to stop looking for it. And in Maple Grove Estates, one homeowner's determination transformed fear into hope, silence into unity, and a neighborhood built on intimidation into a community built on trust.